When we're ice fishing, a lot of times we're fishing for panfish, and a lot of times you'll want to use some kind of a bobber or small float, both to suspend that bait at the level that you want it. Generally you'll start out close to the bottom, but sometimes you may be further off the bottom. So that float will suspend the bait where you want it, and then it's also a strike indicator. During the winter, the fish aren't quite as aggressive. They move a little slower. They aren't as aggressive when they're feeding. So sometimes the bites are really light. If you use a bobber that's too big, you may get a bite and you don't even know it because they won't move your bobber. So what I like to do is carry a variety of sizes of bobbers. Most of them are fairly small, but a variety of sizes. And then I'm going to use a float that matches the weight of the bait that I'm using. What I want is a float that's just barely big enough to keep my bait floating. You'll see this bobber right here is just barely floating on the water. And that's an example of what I'm looking for. That's the right size bobber for the bait that I'm using on that line. Now if I get a bite on that small float will tell me everything that's going on. Sometimes you'll see it just bob down a little bit, maybe just an inch or so, and that'll be a fish that sucked it in and has that bait. Sometimes you'll even see that bobber float up on its side, like that bobber there with no weight on it. If I'm fishing and I see my bobber lay on its side like that, again, that's an indication a fish has swum up and sucked that bait in and is just sitting there holding it. So I set the hook and I have them. Now on another rod, I've got a spring bobber. This would be for a rod that I'm holding in my hand. You can see I'm jigging it all the time. That little spring bobber, and they come in a variety of sizes and styles, but essentially they're just a little spring on the end of the rod. And my line runs through that spring, and that's also very sensitive. So after I jig it for a while, I'll pause, hold that still, and I'm watching that spring bobber. I'm watching that little orange tip. If you see it just bob the slightest amount, again, that's a fish that swam up and taken that bait. Or again, I'm watching maybe that spring bobber will rise a little bit for when a fish has come in and sucked that bait in and is just sitting there with it, or maybe even swam up a little ways with it. Those small bobbers will help you catch more fish on the ice because they're real sensitive. One other little tip I'll give you, and don't tell the fly fishermen about this, but I found these in a fly fishing shop. They're little strike indicators that fly fishermen like to use for indicating when they have a strike when they're using wet flies or nymphs. But they're really good for ice fishing because they're relatively small, come in a variety of sizes. They have a slot in the side, which makes it real easy to put those on your line. And then this rubber core holds your line in place. You don't have to thread the line through the middle of the bobber. Those are real handy to use for ice fishing, and they're small bobbers that I can use just big enough to float my baits and indicate when I have a light strike.